We are delighted to have a very nice panel to join together and discuss around the objectives of our today's panel. So don't get confused. Argyro Kavvada, United States, Jennifer Bailey, Greece. It's not a typo, the Greek name and the English name. So we can move on. Next slide, please. My name is Evangelos Gerasopoulos. I'm a research director at the National Observatory of Athens and director of the Greek GEO office. And as the co-chair of the Resilient Cities and Human Settlements Working Group, I have the pleasure of moderating today's session. The session is inspired by the launch of GEO's new fourth engagement priority, Resilient Cities and Human Settlements, and aims at diving into examples of cities' current needs, gaps and trends, as well as how GEO can support them moving forward. And all this within the context of adaptation to climate change, which on one hand poses additional pressure to cities and calls for resilience, and on the other hand demands solutions that at the same time contribute to cities' sustainability. Next, please. As you see in the agenda, the session comprises of two parts, the panel discussion and an open discussion. We would definitely like to encourage a lively panel discussion and mainly interaction between the panelists and with the audience throughout the whole session, and especially during the open discussion. In the first part of the panel discussion, where cities currently stand, our guests will take us through the experience of Yerevan within the frame of the Urban Climate Adaptation Nexus. We shall also attempt to upscale the Yerevan experience to the global level, talking about urban trends and particularities around different parts of the world, as well as the additional data needs for implementing urban and climate adaptation plans. In the second part of the panel discussion, the growing role of GEO in the urban nexus, we will attempt to describe how GEO can deliver answers to all those needs and requirements, providing examples from existing Earth observation activities inside and outside GEO's frame. Finally, the open discussion, when we shall also launch a number of polls for the audience, will serve for the audience and the panelists to discuss and propose priorities, means, ideas, and new nexuses that the GEO community should take into account to reform its strategy in light of the new engagement priority. I would kindly ask the audience to use the chat tool at any time to address questions to the speakers or share relevant comments or information as they see fit. So next, please. I'll be the first one, according to the agenda, talking, actually setting the scene. And the title of setting the scene is Where Global Meets Local, which matches very well with the overall objective of this year's GEO Symposium. So, fact one, over the course of the 21st century, the urbanization process is ever on the rise. And according to the UN Environment Programme, most cities today are struggling with not only environmental degradation, traffic congestion, and inadequate urban infrastructure, but also with basic services, such as water supply, sanitation, and waste management. Fact two, climate change is a defining crisis of our time, and it is happening even more quickly than we feared, according to the United Nations. And the cost already reaches irreversible heights, and now is the time for collective action. Fact three, in 2015, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development was adopted by UN, setting targets to be achieved in the environmental, economic, social, and institutional domains. And 1 year later, the new urban agenda was initiated, calling, among others, for localized actions, for improved access to science, technology, and innovation. So the encompassing policy framework for cities was set, and then several initiatives set out to decode the universal need for convergence of frames, indicators, and monitoring capacities. Concurrently, there has been a sea change in the domain of Earth observation, where scientific and technological breakthroughs were combined by a paradigm shift in the provision of open and free data. In this fast-evolving landscape, GEO approved back in November 2021 Resilient Cities and Human Settlements as its fourth engagement priority, right next to climate change, disaster risk reduction, and the Sustainable Development Goals, as the means to further coordinate and accelerate GEO's response to the challenges of times. Despite the growing overlap in scope and goals between the Earth observation and city communities in terms of policy frameworks and top-down initiatives, a well-identified lack of engagement exists between the urban planners and the EU community, while city stakeholders still lack a clear understanding and appreciation of the value of EU can bring in this direction. And moreover, there is no consolidated framework for tapping the full potential of Earth observation and integrating it in their modus operandi. Next, please. Coming back to the urban climate adaptation nexus, different city operation concepts have rapidly evolving lately and now encompass the broader aspects of sustainability. As we see in the slide, those different frames are accompanied by targets and indicators, which also raise the issue of adequacy of current urban capacities to monitor the reference basis, the changes, and eventually the very important impact of our actions, as we talked about in the first day of the GEO Symposium. Some of these city operation concepts include resilient cities, as those that have created the ability to absorb, recover, and prepare for future economic, environmental, and societal shocks. OECD has already developed a relevant framework, including the drivers of resilience in an urban context, the relevant indicators, and the policy actions that need to be taken. Sustainable cities or green cities, as those with achieving green social and economic sustainability without compromising the ability of future generations to experience the same conditions. The focus also includes minimizing required inputs of energy, water, and food, and drastically reducing waste, output of heat, air pollution, and water pollution. Then we have zero carbon or climate neutral cities, as those cities working to achieve carbon neutrality in the next 10-20 years through greenhouse gases reduction targets and actions undertaken, as for example, in the domains of buildings efficiency, electromobility, renewables, etc. And cities will undoubtedly play a pivotal role in achieving climate neutrality by 2050. But for this, we need to support them in accelerating their green and digital transformation. And finally, smart cities as the means of technological modern urban areas that use information and communication technologies and various physical devices connected to the Internet of Things to collect data, to manage their assets, resources, and services efficiently, to improve city operations and connect to citizens. All these concepts or frames at the end of the day need to be integrated into some strategic urban planning. Local governments have widely recognized the need for a holistic implementation of such urban plannings for effective institutional responses and informed local decision making. But there are also many barriers to overcome, while new challenges keep appearing, see the pandemics. And there are other aspects that we should keep in mind while trying to address the urban climate adaptation nexus, as for example, the inequitable distribution of the burden of climate change by gender, social or racial group, including environmental injustice, aspects that we have already been discussing in the GEO Symposium. Just one such example is the risk of adverse health effects caused by heat island effect, to be worsened by the increasing frequency in heat waves due to the climate crisis, which is or can be quite dangerous for vulnerable populations who lack access to air conditioning or simply to tree coverage to cool down. All the above demonstrate the several complexities in cities that Earth observation alone cannot probably address, and other data types need to be taken into account and combined to draw a holistic understanding, efficient and sustainable solutions, and real impact on cities. Next, please. Now, many projects and initiatives have attempted to bridge this divide and match city stakeholder needs with Earth observation capabilities, and alternatively steer Earth observation expertise towards applications and improvements within the urban context. Within the GEO Work Program, activities like the Human Planet Initiative and the Global Urban Observation and Information Initiative have traditionally pushing forward EU technological progress to improve urban monitoring, while the recently launched Earth Observations Toolkit for Sustainable Cities and Human Settlements by EU for SDG also aims to facilitate engagement among cities, national agencies, and EU experts under the frame of SDG indicators monitoring. From such efforts, it has become clear that city stakeholders need, want, and seek solutions and innovative tools to streamline the workflows beyond us simply providing EU resources. So what we are currently need to work more on is to become more operational, as Jana, the director of GEO, pointed out in the opening session, and come closer to the real city problems and working processes. To achieve this, we need to keep in mind some basic foundations to be guiding us through. So, for example, within the works of the Smart Share Planet project, such a conceptual framework for driving a successful implementation of EU-based solution in cities has been proposed based on experiences from this project and other relevant projects. You can find details in the relevant publication that you see here, Earth Observation, and integral part of a smart and sustainable city. And I am glad that many of the aspects that we have included in this paper have been also reflected in the GEO Symposium discussions we are having, and vice versa, like the need for dynamic co-design with stakeholders to build trust and engagement and really rocket the impacts. So actually the session on the impacts and the information that we got from JUST was really helpful for us to understand how we can also quantify impacts. The funding pathways and investment in both infrastructure and human resources for needed capacity development, as well as sustainability, versatility in terms of modularity, scalability, and openness, important, and we have also been discussing about openness and data. And finally, piloting involving the whole ecosystem of players. So that would be the landscape as we perceive it, and we are looking forward on a discussion that will shed light on many of the aspects that I put into the place. So next, please. We will commence with the panel discussion. The title is Where Cities Currently Stand. And I will introduce you with our first set of speakers. Next, please. Our first panelist is Mrs. Astghine Pasoyan, an expert in sustainable energy policies, finance, project design, and capacity building with great experience in Central and Eastern European and CIS countries. She's the director of the Energy Saving Foundation, board member of Renewable Resources and Energy Efficient Fund, and adjunct lecturer at the American University of Armenia and Texas A&M Agribusiness Teaching Center. For more details about the CVs of the panelists, you can always visit the session page at the Symposium portal. The next panelist will be Shushanik Asmaryan, Armenia's GEO Principal and Deputy Director for Science of the Center for Ecological Noosphere Studies of the National Academy of Science in Armenia and head of the GIS and Remote Sensing Department. And last but certainly not least, Lilit Sahakyan, the Director of the Center for Ecological Noosphere Studies, with main interest in environmental science, who will be providing us also with insights on in-situ data integration in their activities. So we'll start with Astghine posing a question to actually initiate the discussion and set the scene of what is happening in Yerevan. So, dear Astghine, thank you very much, first of all, for being with us. I know that you have been consulting and assisting Yerevan City in building its own Green City Action Plan. So, can you tell us about Yerevan's current plans to address the city's main issues, build resilience, and also prepare for current future climate change impacts? The floor is yours.
Thank you. Yes, indeed. We at Energy Saving Foundation as a think tank have approached Yerevan municipality and solicited financing to help them develop investment plans. A lot of the cities design their investment strategies based on regular public budgeting cycles without due attention to sustainability and long-term green agenda and vision. And as supporters of the Covenant of Mayors, we first worked on their Sustainable Energy Action Plan, which largely focused on energy, but also green spaces, municipal solid waste, and water infrastructure. And later on, while developing Yerevan's Green City Action Plan, it gave us the possibility to expand the horizon to look at broader environmental challenges such as overall air pollution, soil pollution, loss of biodiversity, and overall convenience and eco-friendliness of the city from the perspective of city livelihood. And we have applied the standard green city methodology that was developed by EBRD. And the actual methodology was designed by ICLEI and OECD. And we have first conducted screening of the state of urban environmental assets, identified the challenges, areas where we've crossed the boundaries of air pollution, traffic congestion, things related directly to environmental assets, but also the municipal urban infrastructures. After identification of the urban hotspots, particularly, in cases where there's too much pollution in air, water, or soil, or if there's too much congestion, or if there's too much automation, there's too much specific energy use per square meter of municipal or residential space, et cetera, et cetera. We had hundreds of indicators we had to assess. We designed particular intervention measures, keeping in mind the longer term vision all the way to as far as 2050, so that the city can gradually integrate green, quote unquote, programs into its midterm and long-term implementation plans. Some of the measures include simpler things like development of the green space. Other things are more elaborate, like optimization of public transportation networks, replacement of diesel cars with natural gas or electric buses, introduction of bike lanes, introduction of designated bus lanes. There are a lot of measures related to energy efficiency and renewable energy use in public buildings, but also residential buildings. And to our pleasure, Yerevan municipality has taken these measures quite seriously. Every time they're planning their next year's budget, we see that very diligently they include measures from the SEAP and the GCAP into their budgeting plans, and they implement or with direct municipal or co-financing various measures, which is very inspiring. And one of the critical conclusions from this is that despite the political will, if there's no proper diagnostic setup of a baseline, professional, handling of the data, analysis and development of intervention measures with involvement of strong technical professionals who will not only design the technical aspect of what type of trees to plant, what type of buses to integrate, but also do proper analysis of the financial side of things, investment and cash flows and paybacks, to put cost effectiveness in the rationale, because eventually this is a public entity, has a lot of limitations in terms of its budget management, public procurement, etc. It has been a clear conclusion that these plans have really helped simplify their budgeting processes, their public planning processes, because in most cases, Yerevan, we also worked on Gyumri Green City Action Plan, which is substantially smaller city in population and institutional capacity as well. It is the availability of ready-made solutions in their pre-approved Green City Action Plan that helps them simply borrow a professionally designed and vetted and approved project, essentially, because these go through elders, city council, basically, city council approval. So there's the political and green filters already applied, so they can simply take those project ideas and put in the budgeting cycle. Something they couldn't have designed on their own because they simply don't have the right staff on board.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you very much, Astghine. I'm really happy to hear how well the municipality is following those activities and how seriously they are taking into account the experts' advisory, how well coordinated this process is. And I suppose what we will be further discussing is how much data-driven and informed are those decisions that are being made. So with this, I will pass the floor to Shushanik and Lilit. So from to my knowledge, there are many projects and activities already taking place in Yerevan with respect to what we are discussing, monitoring and mapping environmental conditions and facilitating the implementation of the city strategy that Astghine just described, in which Earth observation are key parts. So can you please provide us with a few examples on how, in your case, Earth observation is exploited in this aspect and what is the impact on decision-making or city workflows? And if we can go back to the slide deck, please, Sam, feel free, Lilit and Shushanik, to share your time throughout the slides and yeah, take us through. Next, please.
Okay, maybe I will start and I will pass the floor to Lilit. First of all, thank you for bringing us to this nice panel. It's nice to be part of this discussion. I will try to be brief because there are a lot of things to talk and to show you. But anyway, I will start that cities are living urban ecosystems, which include both nature and humans in a largely human-built environmental context. And they have emergent properties that cannot easily be seen by simply looking at the different functional parts of the city. Over several decades, the pressure on urban infrastructure and in the environment of the large cities of the South Caucasus have notably increased, and Yerevan in this context has a top position. This is due to numerous complex and dynamic reasons such as migration, unplanned, unregulated land use, climate change, etc. So next slide, please. Today, I would like to talk about the capital of Armenia, of Yerevan, because Yerevan is the key point in our discussion, which is the social economic center of the country, the capital, where 35% of all the population is concentrated, and which has been facing continuously the environmental problems for several decades. And we should also indicate that Yerevan is one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world, so having 2,800 years old. Anyway, one of the these investigations of these problems assumes the compulsory use of Earth observation with both in situ and remote components, and their processing technologies is a unique source of getting reliable environmental data. Our center, the Center for Ecological Nosphere Studies of the National Academy of Sciences, as an academic institution, is a carrier of both in situ and remote components. And now I will try to show in brief how we are using remote sensing parts, our group. Then later, Lilit will talk about in situ components when dealing with environmental investigations of Yerevan. We perform different, next slide please. We're dealing with different problems, but today I will stay on the urban heat, urban thermal comfort, which is one of the biggest concerns because Yerevan's natural conditions are, Yerevan is located in semi-arid region, and naturally we have dry climate, which will get worsened during these 30 years, during these last 30-40 years, and we try to understand what kind of picture we can get when we just look on the satellite images. Can you change the slide? Yeah. When you look at the right part, on the left part of the slide, you can see that we try to derive the land surface temperature from a Landsat satellite image. We try to assess the change of land surface temperature, which is in fact the source of air temperature. Yes, how it changed during space and time from 1984 up to 2010. And you can on the slide you can see that we have a slight increase of the land surface temperature. And in the bottom, we get the picture of the changes of green space in Yerevan. So it is easily can be seen that this slight change of land surface temperature could be associated with a slight significant decrease of urban green spaces in Yerevan. On the right side, we performed also the classification of land cover. So it was really interesting how land cover changed and where the green spaces and tree covers are one of the subclasses, yes, influence on the land surface temperature. And in this picture, you can see that from 1989 up to 2018, we have the change in land cover classes, and where green spaces are can be seen that these areas are really decreased. So next slide, please. Satellite images gave us some pictures to investigate the land surface temperature increase or decrease and associated green space changes. But it was really interesting to engage in this process also UAV survey and to try to associate this in this process, because when dealing with satellite images, we have several problems, technical problems with atmospheric correction, etc. So UAV survey help us to get more accurate data, and also to try to compare them with the in situ measurements using thermometer, and to try also compare how UAV derived land surface temperature can be useful and can be compared or with those derived from satellite data. Next slide, please. In this data, we have two pictures. On the left, you can see the land surface temperature, which was derived from UAV survey, and on the right side, the land surface temperature, which is derived from Landsat satellite image. There is a strong correlation between these two data, and it helps us to include UAV derived land surface temperature in the list of the components for modeling the air temperature, for modeling the air temperature using the machine learning methods. Next slide, please. One of the methods to assess the urban thermal comfort is the index, the Urban Thermal Field Variance Index, or UTFVI, which is widely used to describe the urban heat island effect in urban areas. So we try to use this also in order to ensure that, yes, the changes in green spaces brings to the change of the situation with urban heat. And the pictures we derived from, again, from satellite images, and calculating this index, it shows that for Yerevan, for the period from 1989 to 2018, the changes from the excellent to the worst category of UTFVI, ecological evaluation index, are located in previous agricultural areas and urban forests, and are mainly related to the loss of green spaces. Next slide, please. So all these investigations concerning to the urban heat and green and the decrease of green loss, and also the additional other investigations that we performed, about which Lilit may say, All this helped us to appear on board the Horizon 2020 Connecting Nature project, which was one of the most powerful families in talking about European, opposing European role in providing nature-based solutions to the world community. And it was a nice chance to be here and also bring Yerevan to this platform, because it helps to continue the dialogue and collaboration that we have started, our center has started with Yerevan municipality. The idea was to use, based on the investigations that we performed before, to think about nature-based solutions and to provide for Yerevan a pilot nature-based solution. Next slide, please, called Green Wall for Kindergartens, and which was a good solution of a small exemplar of the.
If we can wrap it up a little bit, because we're.
I'm finishing. Just to talk that this was a small exemplar how to add green areas which are dedicated to the most sensitive, one of the most sensitive communities of our society, kids and children. So now I will give you the floor to Lilit, who will talk more about, maybe complement my talks. Lilit, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. Thank you for this opportunity to talk about Yerevan and our investigations elsewhere as well. I'm Lilit, director of the SENS, but meanwhile, more than 23 years, I am dealing with scientific investigations in field of environmental geochemistry. And the very big part of my investigations is devoted to urban geochemistry, mainly Yerevan's territory, in situ investigations concerning the urban soil, air, water contamination. My dearest friend and colleague Shushanik talked about nowadays collaboration and mainly Earth observation case studies of Yerevan, but I would like to mention that SENS has in situ investigations for Yerevan's territory since 1979. So now we can build the geochemical history of the city. And the important thing is that due to this information, we had the collaboration history with our municipality goes back to 20-25 years. Of course, these collaborations sometimes were not so productive, not so real collaboration, but in any case, we have several good cases how we collaborate and how scientific data is pretty good for a municipality also. The first collaboration in my scientific career was in 2000. The new general plan of Yerevan had been developing at that time, and the geochemical and biogeochemical investigations of SENS were included in that general plan. Those investigations are about soil water contamination with heavy metals, and the geochemical maps which showed pollution levels and zones of the city with a certain ecological hazard were included in the general plan of the city. Another map was about kitchen gardens. At that time, because of social problems, citizens are using soils as a kitchen gardens. And it is expected that these vegetables and herbs growing in these polluted areas will be contaminated also, and with a wide range of metals. So these both maps are included in this general plan, and the result was that after these maps, the agricultural use of urban soils were forbidden by law in the territory of Yerevan. Another case of in situ investigations and collaboration with municipality was in 2007-8. At that time, the municipality ordered SENS to develop functional tree planting project for the Yerevan city. And the functional tree planting is one of the examples of now so-called nature-based solutions or ecosystem service. At that time, we call it functional tree planting. It means that planting urban green infrastructure, taking account not only the climatic and ecological load of the territory, but also phytofiltration features of the types of the vegetation. So all sense updated in situ investigations, results concerning the soil, air, pollution, transport, road, functional zoning of the territory was included in this project. And at that time, Yerevan have developed a functional tree planting project for the first time in his history. About the first success case of the collaboration is already told by Shushanik about MBC Green Wall. But I want to mention that we have it now, as that time we have already assessed ecological and health risks of all kindergartens of Yerevan's territory. So we didn't need new information, new resources, and new time. Unfortunately, this Great Wall is only one case yet, but now with Shushanik, we are working with municipality because the new general plan is developing now, and we are trying to include this NBC approach as an obligatory for all kindergartens and schools of the city. Of course, hope to succeed, but I think that we all know that it is hard to speak with authorities in the same language sometimes to understand each other. And it is very interesting that just yesterday I received a letter from the municipality. The first time for my life, they ask us, not we ask, they ask us to include mining areas, stone mining areas of Yerevan in our investigation. They know that we have a great state project within which we will investigate the Yerevan's territory street dust, because dust is very topical in our city because we are in a semi-desert. And they ask us to include these targeted territories to our investigations. I'm very happy about this. And so this tendency is good, and I hope that someday we will have a city where scientists will speak in a simple language and the municipality will understand what we say, and we will have science-based decision-making in our city. And in situ investigations will serve as a tool, and we will support this decision-making process also. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you, Lilit. Amazing information you are providing. Happy to see that at least the data that you are producing, remote sensing on in situ, are feeding the current city plan that Astghine described before. And it is nice that in the conscious of municipality of the city, data providers that you are the key players to come and ask for information. I think this is something that GEO needs to know. So I would be intrigued to ask about the openness and accessibility of data. I suppose also Christiana from EEA is intrigued on this question. We keep it for the open discussion. Think about this and we will come back to that. So can you go back to the screen? Yeah. As we are moving to the part of our panel aiming to upscale the experience of Yerevan, two more esteemed panelists will join us. Next slide, please. Daniella Rizzi, Senior Officer for Nature-Based Solutions and Biodiversity at ICLEI Europe. It's a local government for sustainability and network expanding over 120 countries, leading the Urban by Nature program that facilitates relevant capacity building and expertise sharing to empower local governments. Ciao, Daniela. And Christiana Photiadou from the environmental climate change impacts expert in the group of climate change impacts and adaptation at the European Environment Agency. She works on climate change impacts, vulnerability and adaptation, and on the delivery of dedicated tools in the European Climate Adapt. Yasu, Christiana. So I will start with Daniela. Thank you both for being with us. Could you tell us, Daniela, a little bit more about urban trends in terms of the implementation of nature-based solutions to build up resilience, and how applications differ among various parts of the world, considering your work with Urban by Nature and its hubs? We have heard about Yerevan, so what's your experience around the world? Daniela, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Evangelos, and thank you very much for this invitation and for the panelists all here and for this amazing experience from Armenia, from Yerevan. Yes, maybe the next slide, please. Yeah, I'm going to be brief because I want to dive into more the trends and you know how different parts of the world plan nature-based solutions. But I just want to mention that so we have been doing this capacity building program, and it has a lot to do with the methodology that Yerevan just commented about the GCAPs. So the Green City Action Plans, they also follow a kind of an integrated management approach, and we have aligned this capacity building program with this logic, right? So you analyze the status quo, and I think here Earth observations is a very powerful tool to understand the baseline, right? To do the baseline review and understand the starting points. And of course, then we go towards developing strategies and seeing how we finance projects, monitoring, implementing. And of course, the final step would be reviewing and upscaling, right? And making sure that the cycle goes forward for good solutions. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I'm not going to go into this. Next slide is again. So we have been working with many cities around the world, and I just want to say that this program has had a very strong hub in the Caucasus with Armenia, and we have been working with Shushanik and with partners there, and seeing how to plan and implement nature-based solutions. And the next slide is going to show the trends. So here are 4 points that I brought today to the discussion. One is for sure that the implementation of nature-based solutions differs a lot from biogeographical regions, right? From the different ecosystems that we have out there. Because NBS, they have to be locally adapted is very, very important to know the data, you know, from the regions. We have seen in our work that there are different potentials for different ecosystems, and scale also plays a huge role. So for example, the performance of a green roof or a green wall applied to one single city in one single facade is going to be completely different if you can upscale the solution for a whole neighborhood, right? So the impact, for example, in addressing urban heat islands is going to be completely different depending on the scale. Another point is that, of course, nature-based solutions is not only about the ecological part, it's also about social, cultural, and political contexts. So contexts and the conditions on the ground. So we think that you know, raising data is important in both ways, right? For us to understand the political contents and how the land use have been changing, and to be able to see the different trends and forecast. And also the different understandings of nature-based solutions around the globe is something that we have verified through our work. There is known consensus understanding, although there is the IUCN definition. There is also the European Commission definition that we work a lot with, and there is also the UNEA definition now. So the UN has also launched a definition this year. Yes, so these are the points that I want to bring here today. And we have also verified that, of course, Armenia and Yerevan, we have seen that they have been working a lot with these kindergartens, and they have verified a sensible improvement in the air quality. You know, so Shushanik's work in this sense, the work of SENSE has, you know, monitored the impact that the green walls have had in capturing the pollution and actually addressing the pollution problem for the children. So this is also, you can see it in the chat. This is also an example that I want to highlight from this point of view. And I did bring some examples from cities, but we can maybe discuss them later. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Daniela. You brought up some very nice points for the expert advisory group upon which the value proposition for GEO could be based on. So we should take it definitely into account, and we are listening a lot about. Can we please mute our mics while not speaking, please, from the audience? Thank you. So, and also we have been talking much about NBS, but that's not surprising because it seems that NBS is driving mitigation, it's driving adaptation, it's driving sustainability and eventually resilience. So it makes very, very much sense to be focusing on this. So moving to our next panelist, Christiana. So I would like to ask you what is needed in terms of monitoring in order to design, implement, and evaluate urban solutions as the ones we're discussing here. And actually, from your position, where do we currently stand with respect to data collection and infrastructural capacity, especially as it relates to a holistic approach to addressing urban pressures, including climate adaptation? The floor is yours, Christiana.
Thank you very much. And thank you for this opportunity to present our work on urban adaptation, and hopefully you will find it useful. From the European Environment Agency, we tried to address the holistic approach by bringing different components that are needed to tackle this approach through our climate adaptation platform. And if you can move to the next slide. So I will first present you the main tool, the main service that we have as an agency on climate adaptation, focusing on urban. We work on different levels, from urban to regional to transnational and national areas. And what we try to do with this service, which is hosted on the EEA on behalf of the European Commission, is try to develop it to bring together the major components that practitioners need to create a holistic approach to tackle climate change. And this concerns data availability and data quality and data indicators that we have in the platform. It concerns evidence-based knowledge that are coming from the member states, from the EU member states, but also from the EEA member countries, an exchange of knowledge. But it also concerns the key measure types and the key policy implementations that need to take into consideration when designing such solutions. So the Climate Adapt platform aims to develop into a knowledge platform within the mission on adaptation, within the new EU strategy on adaptation, which focuses on urban level. And hopefully from our work this year and the following years, and the work that the EA is doing on GEO, we will improve and provide further input on regional information on climate risk. We will develop guidelines and tools for implementing adaptation solutions, and we will improve the monitoring that is already taking place and reporting from the member countries, and focusing this time on improving the evaluation activities through adaptation indicators that we aim to provide. Next slide, please. So the main tools that we have for the practitioners across Europe is, first of all, the adaptation support tool, which was created under the Cabinet of Mayors, which was, it's basically a stepwise approach that someone can follow to create an appropriate adaptation solution. And the main tool that we have for this support tool is the Urban Adaptation Map Viewer, which basically is a data entry tool for various sectors, for specifically on urban level, and provides information on adaptation, but also on climate hazards that are linked to specific issues, and what is the current situation, but also how it will evolve in the following years. Right now, we are working on updating this map viewer, and hopefully we will bring in more in situ data and facilitated access to in situ data, and improve the metadata, also the information that comes with the data for the urban level through our work on GEO. I will skip the other two tools and focus on my last slide. We can move to the next slide. So besides data and capacity building, we need also to document and provide best practices across the member countries, across Europe. And we do that through a reporting cycle of 4 years through the Urban Adaptation Report. And the main focus of the report every 4 years is to emphasize the importance of climate change adaptation at local level. And this goes through data, this goes through knowledge exchange, capacity, and co-evaluating this whole process of adaptation. The current report will focus on implementation, because right now the cities are transforming from planning, from all this adaptation strategy planning that they have done on national level, but also on regional, on city level, and we will focus on implementation. And it's important to see here what it is working currently, and give the best practices in relation to data, but also in experience, in governance mechanisms, and so on. So we would like to find the best practices and help to create these transformative and innovative solutions that will help other cities also to adapt, if possible, similar action. So right now we are in the phase of interviewing different cities, and we welcome if any of you are interested in participating, contributing in this report. Please contact us, and we will be happy to collaborate further on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Christiana. Interesting, very interesting stuff. It's very important to identify also all those gaps that are needed in order to make this monitoring process, efficient, and have all the information that would need, and to have this information a priori before starting replicating all these good practices that we have been talking about in other cities, so that we somehow pave the ground of what will be needed, and start and let the member states and cities start creating their own capacity. So thank you very much. We are moving to the second part, but as we are moving to that, we could take a short break and launch our first poll survey for today. So the question, you should have a window popping up outside Zoom where you will be seeing the question. The question is, how are your activities in GEO already, or will be contributing solutions to urban climate adaptation issues? So for the GEO community who is with us today, or for others that are having activities relevant to the Nexus that we are discussing, not yet in GEO, but yeah, think about it. Please put some information in the poll without forgetting to name also the activity that you are working for. We shall give it a few minutes. Feel free to keep on replying the poll. It could also be any other kind of projects, not just activities in GEO or else. Looking for applications addressing any aspect of the Nexus that we are discussing as you see fit or relevant. I know it's hard to type in text, much text, but do your best. I promise the next two polls will be, drop-down lists, less effort. And in the meantime, don't miss the opportunity to raise questions to our panelists now that we're having this short break directly to any of the presentations that you will listen to, or any other general questions, or keep your inspiration for the open discussion. Okay. While doing this, we should be probably gradually shifting to the second part of our panel discussion to explore the growing role of GEO in the urban nexus. For this, we are having 4 guests with us that will be taking us through different aspects of how the urban nexus could be served. I mentioned already existing initiatives very active in the urban area, HBI, GEO-OI. In this session, we are giving also the floor to other less visible activities within or outside GEO, and we will be trying to approach 2 more aspects that we have been massively discussing in GEO. One is the engagement of the private sector, and the other is the involvement of citizens in our works. So I will be introducing the panelists, starting with Matthew Foote. He's Senior Director at Willis Towers Watson, Risk Management Insurance Brokerage and Advisory Company, Climate and Resilience Hub in the UK. He acts as a technical advisor to the Coalition for Climate Resilient Investment Management team, and he's also a member of the Global Resilience Index Task Force. So I would really like to see how the private sector, as I said, perceives both challenges and opportunities for environmentally conscious developers from exploiting Earth observation in urban applications. Our next panelist is Linda C., a senior researcher at the Novel Data Ecosystems for Sustainability Research Group in the Advancing Systems Analysis Program at IIASA, Austria. She is working on crowdsourcing and will be introducing the rising role of citizen science and its importance for inclusive urban applications. Then we have the pleasure to have with us Argyro Kavvada, the Program Manager for Sustainable Development Goals at NASA's Earth Science Division Applied Science Program, and the Executive Director of EO for SDG Initiative in GEO. She will be presenting us tangible urban applications, including in the Earth Observation Toolkit for Sustainable Cities and Human Settlements. And finally, Jennifer Bailey, currently in the Global Health Doctoral Program at the University of California, San Diego, and a research fellow at the National Observatory of Athens. So a voice from a student, a PhD student. She's also a member of the Urban Resilience and Sustainable Urbanization Group of the Greek GEO Office and part of the core group of GEO's Urban Heritage Climate Observatory Community Activity, with whom we will look at the benefits of superimposing other new layers onto the urban climate change nexus, specifically that of cultural heritage. So next slide, please. And starting with Matt. Matt, welcome. So from your work in developing public-private risk financing solutions to support urban disaster risk reduction and adaptation, could you please share with us relevant applications to add to our discussion, especially in terms of capturing urban hazard and exposure elements using Earth observation? Matt?
Evangelos, a pleasure to be on this panel. As we've already been hearing to some length with some excellent examples early in the session about how adaptation resilience in the urban context is a critical element of ongoing strategies, and also then the sensitivity and importance of urban areas to the global economy. We've already mentioned the amount of GDP at the moment that urban areas contribute globally, and it's obviously between 70 and 80% of global GDP, but also obviously that over 55% of the world's population reside currently in urban centres. That is going to rise to over 68 to 70% by 2050. When you put that in the context of the climate challenge that we face, both in terms of decarbonisation and net zero moves, and also then to manage the ongoing and likely increases in the severity and frequency of natural disasters due to climate change. This all comes together in a very complex risk environment, which is global. It impacts across every element of urban life and urban fiscal development, and it also impacts on the global economy very heavily. What we're seeing obviously is an increased stress on urban areas, both by urbanisation itself, but then also in relation to the multitude of hazards which can affect them globally. What we're seeing also is a compounding effect, obviously with COVID-19 and other factors. It's become very clear from recent disasters how compounding of vulnerabilities can exacerbate and amplify the negative impacts on urban populations and their economies. What we're trying to achieve, I think, here in GEO is the ability to provide better risk information, hazard information, to try and inform, quantify, and provide evidence around how to then manage these types of disasters going forwards, both a priori, ex ante, and then also responsive, shock responsive. And I'm going to give a couple of examples of where the financial element of that, as much as the policy and societal adaptation strategies that we've heard about, but where the financial risk transfer elements can be used to support that resilience by providing fiscal and capital liquidity when it's needed most, both in terms of immediate shock responsiveness for emergency response costs, but also in relation to increasing resilience on a longer term basis. Next slide, please. So in terms of financial risk, it's a very complex subject, but you can break it into a very simple concept that you try and optimize the use of financial resources in the most appropriate way to the scale of the impact that you're expecting. And so obviously some disasters can have high impact and severity, but they tend to be lower frequency. But you also get then higher frequency events, floods, and other factors which can happen quite regularly, relatively, and can still have financial impact. Now, there are ways to transfer that financial risk to some level using international capital, national level capital, and other sources to try and mitigate that and provide the liquidity that's needed to respond to them. But it's about optimizing it. In every sense, what's needed is an appropriate way to quantify and to monitor the impact of those types of events in the context of the urban areas that are affected. And so you need to understand what we would call the risk equation: hazard, exposure, and vulnerability, be able to capture information that can then provide an appropriate level of forward-looking risk assessment that takes account of the potential level of risk that would then identify, so that you can then plan ahead and provide preset financing to support future events. Thank you. Next slide, please. Two case studies from the Asia Development Bank may help to both identify how those things work, but also I hope to show why Earth observation data provides a very, very valuable and important source of information to support these types of financial risk transfer mechanisms. The first on the left is in Hue in Vietnam, where there's an ADB project to produce a financial element to infrastructure protection strategies against natural hazards and other forms of disaster, which itself is aligned to a geospatial data project called SPADE, Spatial Data Analysis Explorer, which I think gives a very clear link between the need for high quality and trusted data to identify the elements of hazard, risk, exposure and vulnerability in that context, and then to provide that as the basis to enable infrastructure insurance policies to be applicable to Hue and other cities in the project. On the right-hand side, a slightly larger scale, but with a very similar outcome intended, is the Philippines City Disaster Insurance Pool, which looks to bring multiple cities in the Philippines together around a pooling mechanism so that they all can contribute and also benefit from an economy of scale around financial transfer, where there is a need to understand how large-scale events could trigger in one or more cities the need for payouts quite rapidly to support immediate response financing, but also then longer-term financing. Again, what's really critical is to provide the level of understanding between the financing counterparties and those who receive those finances, is the need for effective data sources to allow modelling and then the monitoring of those trigger mechanisms. So, for instance, a large-scale flood that reaches a particular scale and size in one or more cities needs to be monitored and understood. Earth observation can be an important element for any of these types of projects, as not only in the monitoring, but also in producing the models themselves that underpin the financial structuring of those types of risk transfer mechanisms. Thank you. Next slide, please. And so really, I just wanted to highlight that there's an opportunity for financial risk transfer mechanisms to support urban resiliency in the face of current and future events, disaster events to some level. That financing is reliant on the ability to quantify and to monitor those events as they may occur, and then as they do occur, so that they can be effectively financed. And that requires in itself sources of data which are trusted, consistent, available openly where possible, and also allow for the integration of data. We've already heard about the use of, for instance, in situ monitoring mechanisms aligned with Earth observation data to capture the best representation of the urban exposure, the urban vulnerability, and the urban hazard. And what we're seeing now, I think, is as you already said, Evangelos, a sea change in the availability of data through constellation-based platforms like this ICEI example, open data through things like Copernicus, but also then the increased ability for local populations and governments within urban centres to capture data themselves and to provide it to support their own financial risk needs. By bringing this data together in the most appropriate analytical ways, using machine learning, AI, and other mechanisms, provides us with a very new and very innovative approach which can help us to build more effective and more appropriate innovative financing products through the ability of providing the trusted level of information to help those to be constructed and then supported by the financial industries. So really, I think this is very much the starting point of a new generation of the use of Earth observation data, supported by GEO in its remit to promote the use of Earth observation data in this context. And so I welcome the opportunity to make the point for this and to show that it should be a very important part of the future for urban risk transfer and mitigation and the adaptation to future climates.
Excellent. Thank you, Matt. I think that, as scientists, identifying financing pathways for city plans rather than the science project themselves is a really way to go for sustainability of the outcomes of our project. So thank you very much for your contribution. And I will pass the floor now to Linda. I kindly ask to keep up the time because we have coming into shortage of time. So Linda, the role of citizens has been steadily gaining traction and importance. So from your experience, can you explain the foreseen role and perspectives of citizen science in contributing to addressing urban issues like we've been discussing, also in the context of the existing nexuses, and to what efforts are being undertaken to integrate citizen science in GEO from your experience? So Linda, the floor is yours.
Okay, if you could do the next slide, please. Okay, so what is the role of citizens then in tackling urban issues? obviously as citizen scientists, but I think we've talked about co-creation. We've heard that word many times now. So I think citizens really should be key stakeholders in co-creation of urban solutions, for example, in living labs. I just have one example on the bottom, Flood Citizens. This was a project I was involved in where we co-created solutions with local authorities and citizens for an early warning system of pluvial flooding. Adopting more sustainable practices, we could use public transport, bicycles, make sure we plant trees, don't pave our lawns. There's lots of things I think citizens can do on the ground, which could be mobilized by policy. Nature-based solutions, of course, are also being mentioned. And then, of course, as citizen scientists. So there are many citizen science projects around engaging citizens in, for example, monitoring urban biodiversity. So iNaturalist is an example of an app. Low-cost sensors for air pollution monitoring, flooding, as I mentioned, thermal comfort. Urban heat islands have been mentioned. So the middle picture there is from the Extrema project. So that's an app. It's an early warning system, again, for heat waves, and citizens can be involved in that. Green space quality monitoring on the right, that bottom, that's an app that we produced called City Oasis. And again, it's about going out, doing some in situ data collection, which again has been a theme that's been mentioned quite a lot, with either low cost sensors or mobile phones. And then another way in which citizens can be involved through citizen science projects is through visual interpretation of imagery. So very high resolution satellite images, street view imagery, geotagged photographs, you name it. This can be used for both training of remotely sensed products, also validation of these products, which can then be inputs to urban solutions. Next slide, please. Okay, so I was also asked about what are the impediments and needs. So I'm not going to go through everything here because of shortage of time. I'm just going to divide it into two things. The first is general issues in relation to citizen science, data, and geo and Earth observation. And that has been summarized in this roadmap for citizen science and geo, which has been part of the citizen science community activity in geo. So I would invite people to go to that link, or I can post that later in the chat. And there we list all the different impediments and a roadmap for how some of these impediments can be dealt with, whether it's about data interoperability, quality, etc. Then I think the second set of needs are really about this urban topic. So it's either a lack of data, the data just don't exist, but citizens could be involved in the data collection, or the citizen science projects that do exist, the data are not completely aligned with the needs of the cities. And so how do we bring that together? Okay, so I think that's very important. So we simply need more dialogue between cities, citizen science projects, citizen observatories. And we also need, unfortunately, more projects and more funding. So on the right are CENT, Grow Observatory, Ground Truth. Those are examples of citizen observatories that were funded in Horizon Europe, Horizon 2020. And then in the recent Horizon Europe, there was a call on urban sensing and EO, to which we put in a proposal with Evangelos, and also ICLEI and other partners. And so there are opportunities, but we really need to capitalize on those opportunities. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so what are some of the things that have been taking place? So within GEO itself, there is this, as I mentioned, the citizen science community activity. You can find the details on the GEO website. Some of the things that we've been doing very briefly, did a mapping of synergies between citizen science, Earth observation, and the SDGs. So if we focus just on SDG 11, so we have relevance to this, this urban fora. So what you see there are all the different indicators from the SDGs under goal 11 that citizen science could contribute towards, potentially. Okay, so those are in yellow. And where we have the black boxes, this is where Earth observation can also provide inputs. So you can see that there's an overlap between citizen science, Earth observation, and the data that could be contributed towards these indicators. Okay, so those are some of the activities that have been happening in this GEO citizen science community activity. We've got the Lisbon Declaration, that roadmap I mentioned. We've showcased a lot of examples and good practices. We've had a lot of projects funded through the European Union. And again, this has all been part of these activities in the GEO citizen science community activity. And of course, there are also other things happening within GEO, the Global Urban Observation and Information Initiative. If you have a look at that, they, for example, talk about the Extrema project, which involves citizens. And then we have the GEO Human Planet Initiative. Again, that doesn't actually mention citizen science as such, but we, in collaboration with JRC, who are one of the big forerunners of this initiative, we ran a citizen science campaign to collect data on built up areas, just using visual interpretation of satellite imagery. So there are a lot of possibilities. I'm only touching on a few. I'm totally conscious of lack of time, but I hope I've given you an overview of some of the things that are happening. Thank you.
It was amazing. And yeah, I think it's start discussing, probably you have already been resolving this, how to build trust to citizen science data for official purposes like the SDGs we have been talking about. But this is also a nice pass to Argy, our next panelist, and see how far we have use cases of citizen science, you know, examples, use cases in the EO toolkit. So Argy, welcome on board.
Yes.
So
thank you, Evangelos.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's move on with the next slide, perhaps, and I'll go very quickly here. There are a couple of intro slides. So I think we've heard quite a bit today around the discussion, really, that highlights the intersectionality and linkages that exist between this the new urban agenda and focusing at resilient cities and human settlements, but also some of these other global policies that really have strong links to national and subnational priorities. And so within the EU4SDG initiative, we have been looking at advancing, of course, the sustainable development goals and their achievement through the Earth observations and derived knowledge, but also understanding and working with GEO members and stakeholders to really help define and enable some of the links to these other policy areas. One thing that I want to highlight, for example, is that within the SDGs, there are certainly a lot of direct references to cities and human settlements, as well as climate change. And there is also the recognition of the role of ecosystems and biodiversity and a broader harmonization with nature as an integral approach to achieving sustainable development at scale, and we heard quite a bit of that today. Very important, the diagram on the right hand side here from the World Economic Forum also highlights this need for looking at this integrated approach at looking at many of these global sustainability frameworks, with focusing on a range of critical areas around, for example, energy, industry, nature-based solutions, and also urban infrastructure. Let's go to the next slide. I also wanted to highlight that within the EU4SDG initiative and with working together with the Human Planet Initiative and other geothematic activities and contributors, we've looked at the new urban agenda through the lens of also and the connection to achieving the SDGs through local action at the local level. And so really two things I want to highlight here. One is that the new urban agenda serves as the spatial framework for achieving the SDGs through local action, and also places particular emphasis on the need to develop capacity of local authorities and actors to enable, again, SDG implementation at the local level. And so a lot of the things that we've been seeing recently have also been voluntary local reviews that cities and communities are preparing and are emerging as a key tool through which local and regional governments are also sharing their progress on sustainable development goals, strategies, and achievements. Let's go to the next slide. And so today I wanted to talk to you about a particular activity that the EU4SDG initiative within the GEO work program has led in partnership with the UN Human Settlements Program, UN Habitat, many from the GEO community, but also a range of representatives from local municipalities, from national government agencies and other stakeholders. And so this effort focused really, or was based on the recognition that Earth observation data and geospatial analysis techniques are already a part of urban monitoring and informed decision-making processes and have been, and the need to really help consolidate and make more findable, available, and usable different levels of information on relevant data, tools, use cases, learning opportunities, among other levels of information. And so in addition, the toolkit has been really focusing on developing an inclusive and collaborative open knowledge resource, but also community that focuses really on better understanding how stakeholders at different levels, local communities, city, national level, and then also connecting to regional and global, are already using Earth observation data and tools to advance resilient cities and human settlements, and where there may be barriers and what can be done to really help improve those barriers through cross-learning of city and country level experiences. And so you can see here at the bottom some of, for example, data sets that are included in this resource. So example data sets include things like the global high resolution daily extreme urban heat exposure that focuses on providing a record of urban extreme heat events and population exposure estimates, looking at tools like PopGrid and the PopGrid Compare that provides a useful tool for assessing different population products to help inform metrics that look, for example, at population exposure to different types of hazards or disaster events or other types of indicators. And so, in addition, if we go to the next slide, we have had a range of use cases that have also we've been capturing as part of this work and activity or initiative. And so here you see one example from Colombia, where they've been leveraging Earth observation data and satellite imagery to estimate the area of open public spaces, and then also assess how these public spaces are accessible and open to different segments of the population, looking at gender, age, people with disabilities, among other population categories. And so there's a number, if we go to the next slide, of such use cases across an area of topics. And as part of this community, and again, I want to highlight that except for this open knowledge resource, the toolkit has been really about enabling this community development to increase opportunities for collaboration while promoting local participation and increasing transparency, but also enabling this city-to-city and country-to-country learning. And so one of the things that we're currently looking at is engaging with additional cities to help really identify how to help further localize the toolkit and also identify what are additional areas where the Earth observation and derived knowledge can be contributing. For instance, we are in discussions with the city of Orlando in the US to see, for example, how we can be supporting some of their initiatives to help address heat and also pollution-related challenges through different action plans, like, for example, looking at canopy tree planting. So helping really study and identify what are the areas and neighborhoods where they can place their investments in order to help really support populations that are most vulnerable to these different types of challenges. So there are clear links to what we've discussed today, and we're definitely interested in furthering the engagement. And so certainly would love to talk to colleagues that have spoken today offline and see also how we can be further working together to extend some of the things we've been doing within the Earth Observations Toolkit for Sustainable Cities and Human Settlements. The link is there, so I invite you to visit the link and find out more about this initiative, and also get involved if you are interested. We have an active community with these 4 working groups, and so excellent. Please join us.
Thank you very much, Argy. We are really glad to be part of this endeavor for the EO Toolkit. It's really has been showing the way of how to do things. I'm glad to see that there is a DRR, initiative for a toolkit coming soon. So yeah, thank you very much for your contribution. And with this, I would like to pass to our last panelist, Jennifer Bailey. She will be talking to us about the Urban Heritage Climate Observatory, another layer coming on top of urban and climate change, cultural heritage. So Jennifer, please.
Thank you. Yes, I'll try to be really quick and just give a brief overview of the Urban Heritage Climate Observatory, or UHCO, which is a community activity within GEO. It was launched in April of last year, and it really came after a mention of the urgent need to protect heritage from adverse climate change impacts at the 2019 Climate Action Summit. And so the initiative aims to coordinate EO exploitation for cultural heritage, particularly in World Heritage cities, through building upon these existing policy frames that people have mentioned and bringing together stakeholders from the domains of cultural heritage, urban planning, climate change, and Earth observation. So in line with this, the UHCO is co-led by UNESCO's World Heritage Center, which represents both the global policy perspective as well as bringing in local practitioners, and then also co-led by the Greek GEO office. But the consortium itself is made up of 75 organizations, which represent 24 participating countries and contain a very interdisciplinary group of players that are both internal and external to the GEO community. If you go to the next slide, please. As I mentioned, one of the main objectives of UHCO is to serve as a liaison, connecting the dots to link these stakeholders so that EO can be utilized for climate adaptation of extremely vulnerable sites of urban heritage. And so it's really organized around these three main objectives. So mobilizing the untapped potential of Earth observation to further and modernize practices related to the preservation, monitoring, and management of urban heritage. And in order to do this, we plan to use a bottom-up approach to inform global decisions via the creation of a global platform, which will help local practitioners address and adapt to climate change. And as local practitioners are the implementers, identification of needs and good practices in cities can inform the actions of UHCO and start these conversations that allow for collaboration and capacity building, like others have mentioned, and encourage climate action. So cultural heritage can provide another meaningful story to inspire action around sustainable urbanization and climate change, which is the nexus that we've been discussing today. So next slide, please. I'll just glance over these examples, but as part of UHCO's activities, we've been searching for cities with mature climate adaptation activities relevant to cultural heritage and seeing how these actions can be furthered with the use of Earth observation. Feel free to reach out to us and we can provide more information, but if you could go to the next slide, please. And along the same vein, we wanted to kind of enrich our list of potential use cases using the knowledge of UHCO members and partners. So we launched a survey and we have some preliminary results, but the main objectives of this survey were to kind of enrich this repository of good use cases, see the maturity of implementation of different national and local strategies with respect to climate adaptation and cultural heritage preservation, and then determine to what extent EO is already being used and what collaborations are already in place. So there's about 20 interesting cities which can be prioritized. And I think it's noteworthy to point out, just in line with what Christiana said, and Daniella and Linda, that urban heritage is a domain where in situ and ancillary data are needed and can really help in this regard in kind of preservation and planning for climate change. And also there is a need for standardization. So if you could go to the next slide, please. Kind of building off of RG, as we've heard, urban problems exist, climate change is exacerbating and adding to them, and there are all these frames that are kind of urging us to build more sustainable and resilient cities. And UHCO can serve as a great example of how other domains can build off of those existing nexuses and policy frames and actions to motivate and trigger further movement. So there's a clear link with how UHCO can promote and work within the fourth engagement priority of GEO, engage players in the urban domain, and create mutually beneficial solutions that can advance action for more than just one frame or agenda. And cultural and urban heritage can really be a catalyst for actions that address sustainable urbanization and effectively communicate the urgency of climate change. So with that, I'll finish. 1 minute overtime.
Thank you, Jennifer. No worries. As I wrote in the chat, we have been unable to take 10 more minutes if the audience is kind enough to stay with us. So let's launch the next poll, please, so that everybody has a chance to participate. And please, to the audience, raise your hand to pose directly any question to any of the panelists or your view on what we are discussing. So this is the next poll. In 3 to 5 words, what other nexuses do you see playing an increasingly important role in cities? One of the nexus is the one that we're discussing about, climate adaptation and urban areas issues. Another one, another layer brought by Jenny, cultural heritage. Please feel free, 2, 3 words, anything that comes into your mind that would help us in the working group start thinking, you know, of any new nexuses. Be creative. Someone has, I don't know, some are we able to see the results as they come through? I think not, only after we close the poll, right? So please just give us information how the answers are piling up so that we know where to stop this. Sam, Rick, whoever.
Yes, that's right. We have to wait that people answer before closing the poll to show the answer.
So in the meantime, any questions coming lively? Please raise your hand and open your mic and set it forth. Don't be shy. I think we are discussing very interesting things. Unless you consider that we are already resolving all the questions and all the points that are being raised, which I don't think is the case. So, Ahmad, yeah, please turn on your mic and give it a go.
Thank you very much. Did you see my question on the chat about the big problem that we have these days in whole MENA region, including in Iran, in many cities? And I'm sure that GEO, you know, can have lots of possibilities to study and help for this. That's what I'm interested really.
Exactly.
But we need support.
Good point you are raising. Some of those elements can be addressed by satellite information, like recognizing partners or feeding, assimilating data into forecasts and projections like dust that you mentioned. But you raise another very nice point about toxical particles in dust. Yes. These are elements that you can take from in situ sampling and chemical analysis, which brings out 2 elements: the importance of in situ information, the importance of opening local data and making it accessible to others so that they're able to be using them in their studies. So yeah, I think this is an attempt, this is an endeavor we are taking in GEO to bring.
Yeah. I'm myself an ecotoxicologist, you know,
exactly,
ecotoxicologist, and that's what I'm very interested, especially that, you know, to see really what are possibilities of. Always I'm thinking about the dust, the toxic particles in this dust, that there's a big problem is coming from the west, from Iraq, from North Africa to Iran, and is most. I'm ready really to do, but we need support really to do studies, for mostly, as I said, for my part as a toxicological study.
Oh, excellent! Please join GEO, and there are dedicated groups working on in situ, which will be very willing to support with capacity building and consultation and information on how you can be looking into these themes. So thank you very much for your contribution. I think we should close the poll. Sam, thank you, Sam. Is that closed? Yeah, okay. And we go to the last poll. The question is, where should the GEO community concentrate their efforts to address urban issues? So we are discussing about adapting satellite information for cities to meet the requirements needed, integrating in situ data, including the Internet of Things, assimilating citizen science, as we discussed, combining all the above, but also with auxiliary data. It was stressed out very strongly by many of the panelists, having socioeconomic health data as we are discussing now. And the last is creating synergies between the above. Please give a rate to enable us, perceive the prioritization that we should have in mind. Shushanik would like to take the floor, please.
Thank you, Evangelos. Thank you all speakers. It is not a question, but more like some idea, which maybe supported also by Daniella, who is and together with ICLEI, she said that we have nice work implemented in the framework Connecting Nature project. And in this globalization context, we have created different, many urban hubs, regional hubs, among which Caucasian hub is one of these successful working hubs. Daniella may compliment me, but just the idea comes in my mind to think how GEO platform could contribute to keep this hub working, because Connecting Nature project ends, and we should keep these hubs working, and to think about really how GEO can contribute to their working process, because we have different hubs. Yeah, Daniela, maybe you will compliment. And this is an idea to think about for the future, and how Earth observation component could be could complement and could help in their existence and their further works. That's an idea to think.
Yeah, I didn't say a lot of things about this because I wanted to be shorter, because I knew in the schedule, Evangelos. But I think, I want to put in your hearts that the planning and implementation of nature-based solution has not been using the power of Earth observation so far as it should. Nature-based solutions, they're very complex to plan because you don't have NBS coming from one discipline. It comes from 8, 9, or 10 different disciplines. And then if you put the health aspect as well into the game, so you have the water department, the finance department, the health department. So if you think about a city, there's so many different departments to be able to plan and implement nature-based solutions. And we talk a lot about climate mitigation, and the climate agenda is very strong, but there is a bigger wave, which is biodiversity loss. And NBS can contribute a lot to hold back biodiversity loss and contribute to biodiversity net gain. So I really think that GEO, the work that you are doing with this data that we have read in the chat, the importance to have data that can speak to one another, to have like a kind of a global, let's say, ambassador for the data, and also so that different data sets can speak to one another. This would be very, very helpful, for NBS implementation. We have created nine hubs in Brazil, in the Caucasus, Korea, China. Now there are 3 being launched in Europe, Scotland, Spain, and Flanders. But if we had more, work more closely to the community, working with Earth observations, I think we could make like a great jump, and so I just want to put this in your hearts. And thank you so much for the invitation.
Excellent, nice. Okay, so it's time to wrap up. Thank you all for staying up 10 more minutes. Many thanks to all panelists for giving their perspective and their deep insights on the topics that we have been discussing. So my summing up of what we've been discussing, actually the conclusion is that it seems that we converge that cities are the land where many different frames exist, and but also very many opportunities are over there to make things and future better. Just to mention climate change, DRR, sustainable development, the citizens and inclusiveness is there, the private sector and how to engage there, the complexities are there that we should be trying to resolve, such as citizens which have governance which has issues, but also has the tools to enable us incorporate Earth observations, etc. So yeah, I think the urban domain is the place where we can make through this vision of this year GEO Symposium, which is global to local, and I would say local to global. So with these words, I would like to thank everybody for your attention, yes, stay tuned for the next the next session in the GEO Symposium, and we keep in touch. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.